Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the band is out on the field. He's going to go.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
What did we learn from the 2024 college football season? We are 211 days away from kickoff, which means we've got plenty of time to ruminate about what we just saw, what we came through in what I believe is most entertaining college football season that we've had, at least in recent memory. And Trey, today on the Three Technique, we're going to break down some of the biggest storylines that we took away from the 2024 season, things we liked, things that we didn't like. And most importantly, we had viewer feedback from questions over on Twitter. So a lot to incorporate, a lot to break down, and a lot to learn, I think, today. But first and foremost, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Mitch. I'm excited to kind of tie a bow on the 2024 football season. It's a Friday night recording, which is a little weird for us, but
Yep.
Had a watermelon high noon for dinner, and I've got a lot of opinions. So buckle up.
Oh, you're just juiced up and ready to go. We've
Not
got a lot of
sponsor,
opinions.
by the way. Not a sponsor.
Not a sponsor, could be. We are wrapping up year 3 of the show. So hey, if you wanna come support the boys and what we do heading into year 4 and beyond, hit us up, 3techpod@gmail.com. First, I think a big shout out to the Jimmies and the Joes. We continue to thank you guys. And again, as we wrap this up, we kind of finished the national championship reaction show with a similar sentiment, but the growth and all the new Jimmies and Joes that we had jump on board this season, a lot of fun to see you guys enjoying what we do, talking ball with us in the comments, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, @3techpod. It's really, really cool. So we really enjoy it. And if you're new, if you're finding us, if you're just kind of looking around for hot takes about the 2024 season, and you find our podcast for the first time on YouTube or in the podcasting sphere, welcome. Hit subscribe, like the show, and join the ride. We're not slowing down, by the way. We've got content planned for the entire off season. So, some college football shows kind of go dormant until, I don't know, May or June or so. Not here on the 3 Tech Pod. We've got a lot in store. We've got breakdowns, deep dives, just quite a bit of content coming down the pipe. So if you like all that, lock in, subscribe to the show, and let's party.
Trey, I'm already researching the too deep of the Nevada offensive line for next year's preview show. So
my guy, well, that's probably good because we wrote Nevada off real quick this past season. We wrote Arizona State off real quick this past preseason, and look, sometimes it comes back to bite you. I actually want to talk Arizona State to start. I think basically we put a bunch of ideas, lessons that we learned, good and bad, from the 2024 season into a run sheet, hit blend, and we'll see what comes out the other side. Talent parity, though, is one of the most requested topics that we got when I put out a question on our social media. What did you learn? What did you, the fan, enjoy? What didn't you like? And talent parity was one of the most requested topics. And so I think for me, the idea that talent disparity and parity in the game is alive and well. And I think we saw that in spades this year, right? I mean, Arizona State comes to the top of my mind where they're literally picked dead last in the Big 12. They go on to win the conference and go to the 12-team college football playoff. Ashton Jeanty stays at Boise State. He had double, even triple the NIL offers that he got at Boise State. He got a nice NIL package at Boise State. Don't believe that he just sat in Idaho and just played for the love of the game. That's not true at all. But what he did do was he subscribed to the culture. He wanted to finish his tenure out on the blue turf, and he objectively took less money to do that. Harold Fannin Jr. at Bowling Green, right? I mean, I could go on, but I think with the transfer portal, as many people want to talk about the issues with it and the holes in NIL and the way that it's destroying the sport. And listen, you can make a great case for all of that. I tend to agree with you on a lot of it. But the idea that just these 4 or 5 teams are going to get all the infinity stones, right? Like a lot of people were saying when the portal came around for the first time. I think that has been proven to be null and void at this point, where we sit in January 24th, 2025.
Yeah, and your program, your boosters, your NIL collectives, they're going to have to step up to keep your elite talent on campus. We're already hearing rumors of the Ohio State wide receiver core and the ridiculous offers that they're getting, right? I can't remember if that's something we're talking about later in the show or not, but Jeremiah Smith apparently was rumored to be offered $4.5 million, right? Carnell Tate, $1 million. Your NIL boosters and your collectives are going to have to step up to keep your elite talent on campus. But one thing that we've said from the beginning of this transfer portal madness is, yeah, the guys that are moving from medium-sized programs to massive programs are going to steal all the headlines, but the depth pieces that leave the major programs, the Georgias, the Alabamas, the Ohio States of the world, and go ball out at a smaller situation, even maybe in a power conference, like a Sam Levitt going to Arizona State, transferring into Arizona State, like you mentioned. Those guys are not going to steal the headlines in the offseason, but they're going to steal the headlines during the season. They're going to be quality pieces that can lead to special seasons like we saw at Arizona State, like we saw with Indiana this year, building their roster through the transfer portal. You're going to see the other side of the spectrum where coaches just completely whiff on a transfer class. Mike Norvell at Florida State is a prime example of this. He rode a transfer class from a couple of years ago right to the verge of the college football playoff in an undefeated season in 2023. Tried to do the same thing in 2024, and they went 2-10. So you live by the transfer portal, you're probably going to die by the transfer portal eventually. But there's no denying that it's spreading the talent around, and it's not an infinity stone situation like you mentioned. It's actually causing some depth issues at these big programs that they're not used to having. And we're seeing that translate to more losses throughout the season and just parity in general. We're seeing more teams have a chance at competing for a title at the end of the year.
Which is the whole point of the 12-team era, right? And listen, I know that just as it seems like we're getting things right and we had an objectively fantastic playoff run, the corporate overlords are getting ready to expand this even further, right? 14 is probably going to end up being 16. I think that's the most common complaint that I hear right now, is even for folks that have come over from the anti-expansion camp to saying, you know what, that was pretty fun. Like, let's be honest, that was an enjoyable watch. The fact that we're immediately just going to skip past any sort of happiness or homeostasis and go right to another change, like that objectively stinks as well.
Yeah, I wish we could just let it ride for a few years and truly see if 12 is where it needs to be, or if we get a few teams that have a case to be in a 12-team playoff. I think this year there was a clear line, like we've said, that 3 losses was way too many unless you won your conference, but I wish we could get 10-ish years of experimentation and not just rapidly react off of a small sample size or the prospect of a little bit more money.
Yeah, I agree. I think for the health of the game, if college football was truly about the things that we valued the most, right? The entertainment, the tradition, the pageantry, then we would be doing that. There's no doubt about it. There is no reason other than available dollars to go to a 14 or a 16 team, right? 12 really did feel like a solid number based off of just 1 year of data. But if you want to say that it needs to be shrunk to 8 or back to 4, we can have that discussion. I would say, based on what I saw this year, I don't know that you have a case for that. I also don't think you have a case to expand this up to the Sweet 16 either. Again, other than just ad revenue and corporate NFL stadiums that want to host a bowl game,
and AD's wanting another home game and all the revenue that comes with that, because that's going to be a big deal.
Yeah, it certainly is. You know what? Kind of a sidecar to this was a question that we got from Mike Waxman over on Twitter, one of our good friends, and he does a lot of good statistical work, hosts his own show as well. CFFM Waxman, I believe, is his Twitter handle. He made the point that based off of 2024, it sure looks like the Big Ten is closing the gap on the SEC, right? And if you listen to talk radio, if you listen to other podcasts, that's been a popular topic of discussion over the last week or so, that SEC wasn't in the national championship, right? Other than Texas, you didn't really have a lot of impressive showings from SEC teams. And instead, we watched the powers from the Midwest do battle. Ohio State, Notre Dame, Penn State had a great chance to be in a national championship game as well. It felt like the Big Ten Conference took a great step forward with Indiana and Illinois and heck, even Michigan kicking around and trying to ruin Ohio State's season. We'll talk about that more later. Ending Alabama's season with a loss. Where do you land with that? Again, just 1 year of data seemingly, but it's a compelling case for the Big Ten this year.
I do think they're closing the gap, and I think long term, I've said this on the podcast before, if I'm a free agent school, I would want to latch onto the Big Ten rather than the SEC if I had to choose one of those two today in January 2025. But I think the idea that the Big Ten top to bottom was better than the SEC this year is still off base. I think for the last 20 years, we've heard nothing but SEC dominance. They've won the most championships. They've had the highest NFL draft picks, best recruiting classes, all that jazz. It's mostly been Alabama and more recently Georgia carrying the national championship water for the whole conference. Yes, you've had the pop-up years of LSU, Auburn a couple times, Florida at the very beginning of that run, right? But it's mostly been Nick Saban and his disciple Kirby Smart kind of carrying water from a national championship standpoint. How many championships does the SEC actually win if Nick Saban made it in the NFL? Probably not as many. There's probably a lot more parity over the last 20 years. I don't think that's any breaking drastic news, right? So it was a big seismic shift when he left and retired at the end of last season. And when you talk about parity, the SEC from top to bottom has the most parity of any conference, maybe not named the Big 12. Quality parity, teams that can jump up and beat you any given week because they still have the most talented league from top to bottom on paper, and the most fan bases that are going to be rapidly invested in getting that talent. So in an era where fans kind of have control over player acquisition in a way that they, I guess, have had before through paper bags and Trans Ams and whatever you want to call the old days, but in a way that's all above board and a lot more fans can feel like they have buy into that, the SEC is going to lead the way in player acquisition from top to bottom. Obviously, the top of the Big Ten is going to be right there with every single school in the SEC. The Ohio States, Michigans, Penn States, a few USCs, maybe if they can get their act together, Oregons of the world, are going to be right there with everybody in the SEC. But if you talk about, if you want to compare down the line, I guess who was like 10th best in the SEC this year? You're probably talking about Florida, Vanderbilt, right? Like that level. Florida, Oklahoma, Missouri compared to Minnesota or Purdue or, fill in the blank, Washington, all these schools that, yeah, they have rabid fan bases, but just not to the level that the SEC has. So I would tap the brakes on the SEC doom and gloom until we get a few more seasons in, but let Alabama kind of get their act together under Kalen DeBoer. Let Kirby Smart figure out life with the transfer portal. Give it a couple years and let's talk and see where we're at, because I don't think long-term the SEC is getting passed by.
I tend to agree. It feels like the top of the Big Ten did get deeper. So the conference overall got
a little
deeper.
Bit, but really it was the whole year. There were like 4 teams that were ranked in the top 25, and then Illinois kind of jumped in at the end.
Well, right. And I mean, that Illinois win over South Carolina, a team that, we heard the internet just complain uproariously should have been in the college football playoff, and Burt Ball, mock Shane Beamer while he steals a bowl win away from the Gamecocks. I think that had kind of a sour note that it left in SEC fans' mouths. And, listen, it's something that Big Ten fans can hold dear. I think the funny thing is when I listen and think of the structure of both the conferences, is it too much to say that Kevin Warren leaving for the Chicago Bears might have been the best thing that could have happened to the Big Ten a couple of years ago? Tony Petitti comes in, but one of the big issues that you always will have a bone to pick with the SEC is the leadership, right? Greg Sankey. Sankey probably
the
couldn't
most
lead his way out of
overrated leader in college athletics.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that is running amok under his leadership, right? And listen, I don't know a ton about Tony Petitti, and it could just be all anecdotal, but it's easy to see things that go wrong in the Southeastern Conference and go, it's finally catching up to Greg Sankey, and think that maybe that window of opportunity is opening for other conferences like the Big Ten. So, interesting discussion. We'd love to know what you guys think as well. At 3Tech Pod, comment, subscribe. We'd love to hear from you on that. Trey, I think bowl season was a ringing success this year. And we talked about this kind of throughout. We didn't ever do an episode dedicated to bowl games as they were being played. But in the bowl preview that we did, you made the point that it felt like a lot fewer opt-outs were kind of running rampant, and that most of the teams had at least their starting core that was wanting to finish the year out and play a bowl game. And I think that gave us a wholly entertaining couple of weeks, honestly, until we got to the playoff. And I guess a little bit past after the first round of the playoff, where maybe some players had more time to think, declare for the draft, decide to opt out. Those first 2 weeks of bowl games, man, that was some of the most entertaining football that I can remember since a kid, when bowl games objectively mattered to everybody.
Yeah, the fewer opt-outs definitely translated to better games. It seemed like there was more buy-in from the players and coaches, like you mentioned. And look, I'm the guy that was sitting here with a plan to fix bowl season, scrap it all out at the beginning of December, because on paper, it really wasn't looking good. But when you have, I think it was twofold. I think incorporating all of the New Year's Six that we got used to during the 4-team playoff into the playoff, incorporating those bowls obviously up the stature of those games. No one was going to opt out from a college football playoff quarterfinal or semifinal game. But that next tier, it was a lot of guys that either were just playing one more round, or you saw the Colorados of the world. None of their big guys opted out. I know they got blitzed by BYU, but you saw major players for the first time in a long time choosing to play in this game that so many have called meaningless. And it led to a lot of fun football.
I agree. I think just the classics that we got, the Game Above Sports Bowl, the Hawaii Bowl, not standalone games necessarily. Well, I guess they technically were standalone games, but it didn't need to be standalone to have me locked in, right? I mean, we got done with Christmas Eve dinner, checked the score of the Hawaii Bowl, and was like, you know what? No, I think everyone's going to bed. We can lock in for this fourth quarter. And it was worth it. It wasn't just a sidecar to Christmas Eve. It was like, no, this is really a quality product. So I think first and foremost, what I took away from it is that the G5 can compete. I mean, we saw the group of 5 teams go in and beat, power conference opponents. I loved seeing the way that they showed up. They wanted to finish out seasons. You had a team like Sam Houston State, right? Playing for their first ever bowl victory. Head coach leaves. Literally everybody is in the transfer portal, but they all decide to play in the bowl game because the job's not done, right? And they go out and they win the Arnell Carriers Bowl over, just had it at Georgia Southern. Great win over Georgia Southern. Tough team under Clay Helton. But those are the storylines that I think really made this bowl season anyway, so worth it to watch. What were some of the best storylines that you kind of watched through bowl season?
Man, I think BYU doing what they did to Colorado, not a close game, but all that attention was on Colorado. That you could tell that the ESPN script was Colorado was going to run away with this, and we're just going to make this Shedeur and Travis Hunter ride off into the sunset, right? And BYU doing what they did, just dominating that game from start to finish.
Yeah.
Amazing. Cinema. Absolute cinema. I remember the Birmingham Bowl. I think it was Georgia Tech and Vanderbilt. That one was a really
Yes.
fun game. Diego Pavia and Haynes King duking it out. Oklahoma losing to Navy the way that they did in the Armed Forces Bowl.
That was wild.
Just seemingly in control, but kind of playing with their food the whole game, and then give up a few big plays to lose that one in the final seconds, snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Overall, there were just a lot of fun one-off games. And I'm doing like a little bit of quick research here on the fly, but viewership records were set as well in a lot of these games. You had, obviously, the playoff games drew a ton of eyeballs other than the championship. The championship was way down. That we'll talk about in a little bit. But I'm looking like the Mayo Bowl had over 3.3 million. The Music City Bowl, 2.82 million. Texas State versus North Texas drew 1.7 million.
That is amazing.
Like, people are watching these games, and we love football. We're starved for football, obviously. But yeah, I'm just rolling down this list right now. There's tons that were over 4.5, pushing 5 million if they were on a network broadcast like ABC or Fox. So people are watching, people care about these games. I think fan bases like to pretend like they don't care when they lose and say it's a meaningless bowl game, and guilty as charged. My team lost the Vegas Bowl in embarrassing fashion, and I was coping with that. But people do care. People are watching, people are gambling, and bowl season is going to matter as long as there are eyeballs like that watching it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm glad you shouted out two things that you pointed out. One, you talk about like the Mayo Bowl. I think the Mayo Bowl, the Pop-Tarts Bowl, these bowl games that lean into a shtick, but not just like any shtick. They've got to do it well. And I think those two bowl games in particular are clearly creating their own brand where, to be honest, I think the majority of college football fans, at least in our little ecosystem on Twitter of college football sickos, you could put anybody in those bowl games and we are all showing up to watch, right? Because for the Mayo Bowl, we want to know who's going to get dunked, what kind of weird shenanigans, what are they eating up in the press box dipped in, your favorite dairy. For the Pop-Tart Bowl, they've got, I mean, they're doing like musicals, basically. They've got all these people in costume and, they're killing off, they're sacrificing Pop-Tarts and they're raising Pop-Tarts from the dead. I mean, they're doing quite a bit. Just hat tip to everybody involved with all of those PR stunts. Because they're doing
6.8 million viewers for the Pop-Tarts Bowl.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That's a bowl game where Cam Ward in the second half said, "I've got my record, I'm out." And you still retained viewership. That Miami offense did nothing in the second half, and yet people still wanted to watch because they wanted to know which Pop-Tart was chosen by the MVP to be sacrificed and eaten live on national broadcast. Like, that's amazing. That's good for the sport. I love that. Secondly, you shouted out Texas State, North Texas, the First Responders Bowl. Drew Mestamaker, man. We never talked about this, but I was covering that game in person. So, it was all over our Twitter account. Hadn't made a start since freshman JV in high school, since he was 14 years old. And this kid comes out and throws for 450 yards. He gets his opportunity against a really bad defense for Texas State. And dadgummit, he almost willed North Texas to a victory. That was one of the most fun bowl games that I got to watch, bar none. And it was really epic that I got to be there in the press box for it.
Yeah, that was a really fun game. Texas State obviously getting the big win to win a bowl game for the second straight year, but future looks bright in Denton. That's another thing that I love about bowl games is even in losses, right? Coaches are going to treat these completely differently. Obviously, everyone wants to win. We just spent a lot of time talking about that. But part of the cope, if you lose, is you can look for these bright spots, right? It does the opt-outs, the bright side of even when there are opt-outs and transfer portal shenanigans are, there's ways to see, okay, that wide receiver, that tackle, that safety who was sitting on the bench all year. We've been hearing about it, practice reports, or we were really excited when we signed that guy. He finally got some game action and we got to actually have data points on him. So positive or negative, we can see kind of project out the future.
Yeah. Well, we didn't lead the show with this because we didn't want to start on a grumpy note. Or maybe it's not a grumpy note because you know what? our third lesson is that the regular season being devalued crowd, I think they've been exposed as just tired and flat out wrong. Now there's a couple of semantics to this, and I was doing some research. I was trying to gauge the national perception of that take, because before we got to the 12-team playoff, as we were queuing this up, as we saw it coming down the pipe, you had a lot of people saying it's going to ruin the sport, right? None of the regular season is going to mean anything. It's going to be the same old teams that make the 12-team playoff, and we've taken away the novelty and the unpredictability of this game. Wrong. I mean, all of this year was a throwback to 2007. Every single week, it felt like we had something unexpected. And while I think if you're upset about, Pitt not being able to end West Virginia's season in a crazy game on rivalry weekend to close the season, if you're upset that Michigan didn't doom Ohio State's season by coming out of nowhere to win that game, then you're probably not going to be happy, right? At this point, I may question if you're going to be happy ever again watching college football, because our game is changing, right? It's a little bit of keeping up with the Joneses. But outside of that, Trey, I struggle to even comprehend how that is still an argument. Again, because after the first round of the playoff, the system worked. We got classic after classic. We were just, fully wrapped in as far as attention goes all throughout the regular season. I thought this year was a roaring success, and to argue otherwise, like I said, I just kind of wonder if maybe college football isn't for you anymore.
Well, okay, a couple things. I'm going to start with what you just said, because we all agree that 2007 was like the gold standard of modern college football, chaos and fun. And that was a year that we had a BCS championship where two teams got in. You mentioned the Pitt over West Virginia upset. Who did that let into the championship, Mitch? Do you remember?
Oh, I don't. Was that wasn't 2-loss LSU, was it?
It was 2-loss LSU.
Yeah.
So all the people that want to hold up 2007 as the gold standard, the national champion in that year had 2 losses before any conference championship game or BCS championship game scenario. So we've always had this as a possibility, but now with the expanded playoff, the regular season still has value. You can't go around, just ask Alabama when they lost to a 6-loss Oklahoma team, just ask South Carolina when they had LSU dead to rights and then blew that game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ole Miss against Kentucky. Like you can, it's not going to be the situation where number 3 loses a game late in the season. They're 100% out of contention, like you said, but each game still matters. You might get a mulligan, but if you use up your mulligan, then you're out of mulligans. And that game that you weren't expecting to use your mulligan on all of a sudden mattered a whole lot. So I think what I love about the expanded playoff and what I've always loved about the expanded playoff, we'll talk about scheduling here in just a little bit, but
yeah,
we're never going to have truly balanced scheduling. There were years that Clemson went 14-0 and got up for the semifinals and championship, but they might have had 2 losses in the SEC those years. Like 2015, 2016 SEC, when Mississippi State was up with Dak Prescott, Ole Miss was getting going, all the typical powers were doing typical power things, right? I don't think that they run the table in the SEC those years, even with all the talent that they had. But when you get a 12-team expanded playoff, we don't have to have these hypothetical arguments. We're settling it on the field. And the regular season should matter, but you also shouldn't be able to schedule your way to an undefeated season from a lesser conference and just get benefit of the doubt to be thrown into a 4-team field. If you went undefeated, I think you should have been in and you could have earned the right. But now we're not going to leave any teams out that have a legitimate claim. And the regular season still matters. If you lost 3 games, you used all your mulligans and you still lost a game, you were left out. And I think that argument would have had a lot more validity to it if an Alabama, if an Ole Miss, if a South Carolina got in this year. But I thought the committee, I still do think, even with the first round blowouts, I think the committee did a great job of making the regular season matter and punishing teams that use too many mulligans.
And, I'll say this too. We talk about a lot of different elements of this season and say, well, it's just been 1 year expansion, right? Or trying to shrink the game back down to four playoff teams. It's just been one season. You can't use one data point to extrapolate and say this is truth, right? So we also can't say that there won't be a year where the 12-team format maybe quote unquote fails the sport, where a 3-loss Alabama or 3-loss Ole Miss with some terrible losses gets in because of the way that the seeding works or the way that the rest of the league broke down. But I think to your point, it's not, if that happens, it's not mutually exclusive to the expanded playoff era. We had teams like a 2-loss LSU that I remember the talk before that national championship game. Alabama's going to roll LSU. This isn't even going to be competitive. And yet LSU found a way to come out on top, right?
Oklahoma. Against Oklahoma.
My bad. Oklahoma.
Yeah, you got it.
But so, yeah, my point is, for every nitpick that you want to say, there's another case to be made, right? I mean, you can argue the other end of things till we're blue in the face. I just look at from a 30,000 foot view. I decided to enjoy this season for all the faults and the little hiccups that we had along the way. Just some of the games, Trey, some of the games that we enjoyed late in the season where people in the anti-expansionist camp said the end of the season, not going to mean anything, right? Not really going to matter nearly as much. Week 10, South Carolina over number 10, Texas A&M. Texas Tech over number 11, Iowa State. Houston over number 17, Kansas State. SMU over number 18, Pitt. Week 11, Alabama beats LSU. Army keeps it rolling. They're alive for the college football playoff. Colorado beats Texas Tech, right? Week 12, Arizona State, unranked by week 12 over Kansas State, who's 16th. South Carolina wins again over Missouri. You go week 13, week 14, we still had big matchups. And with all the hype that came with that, I never heard anybody complaining that, this would be better if we were back to a 4-team playoff. You had more fan bases completely locked in. You had more playoff scenarios than we've ever had before. It replicated the professional league, right? It replicated an MLB pennant chase, playoff wild card push in the NFL. It was exciting, not just if your team was in it, but also just as a third-party bystander going, man, this is kind of awesome. Like all the storylines that we get to deal with. So, that was a Twitter thread that went out, I think during the national championship, maybe. And I responded saying, you know what? I just chose this year to enjoy from 30,000 feet and took in a wonderful college football season. And it seemed like a lot of people agreed with us on that.
Yeah. And I think above all else, it gives coaches, it gives teams, it gives programs the chance to develop over the course of a year. You're not going to get sunk by a loss in September. And even if you grow and are playing your best football at the end of the year, you're probably still going to have a chance, right? You're going to be playing for something at the end of the year. So there's more games that truly matter. There's more games that, from a standpoint, I'm also the belief that college football is about more than just the national championship. I think that conference championships are cool. I think winning a bowl game is cool. I think being a team that has struggled to make a bowl game and making a bowl game is cool. I think getting from the 6-win plateau to the 8-win plateau is cool. There's so many storylines and so many different facets to the college football regular season that it's never not going to matter. It's so unique in that way that it's never not going to matter. And yeah, to say that we've devalued it after 1 year is just lazy at this point.
Yeah. Last two things I had on this, and then we'll move on. 2024 Darlings, Boise State, Arizona State. We don't get to enjoy their runs. We don't get to enjoy that Peach Bowl Classic. We don't get to enjoy Ashton Genty's farewell in the Fiesta Bowl, if not for an expanded playoff, right? Like there's real value to having those teams get to trailblaze paths for their program to the college football playoff. And finally, and the bottom line for me, Trey, was that college football fans in general got what they wanted. They got to see a national championship decided on the field through multiple rounds, not just a semifinal and a national championship which historically have not been all that competitive, we got to watch a team overcome real adversity, real hurdles, real hate from the media, from the outside influences, pave their way to a national championship. I think both for Notre Dame and Ohio State. I don't know how you look at those teams' stories and go, yeah, but it would have been better if it had just been 4 teams. Like, I'm at a loss there.
Yeah, and we wouldn't have gotten to watch some of those players that made amazing plays. They would have opted out of
Sure.
the New Year's Six game, so we wouldn't have gotten more time watching those players. So yeah, 12-team playoff was a success for me, full stop.
I know it's extremely divisive in some corners of Twitter, so let us know where you land on that at 3TechPod. Write in, drop it in the comments in YouTube as well. Trey, a couple other things. We can tighten it up through the rest of these. I've got write a new targeting rule, for heaven's sake, as lesson number 4. No automatic buys for the 4-conference championship as number 5. And then the scheduling discussion, which we can get into. I'll turn it over to you, though. Kind of land the plane wherever you'd like.
Oh, man. Targeting, yeah, I'm just at a loss. I don't know how you fix it at this point. And we need player safety, but it's just gotten so far. I'm in favor of the card system, kind of like soccer, where you get a yellow card if it's your first one, and you could get a straight red if it's just completely egregious, but a yellow card, sit out the rest of the drive, something like that, sit out a quarter, and then you're back in. I think the penalty is too harsh for the crime right now, especially with just how differently it's called across the country. I'll just say that. Yeah, I don't think we're going to get a lot of pushback on the no buys for the 4-conference champions. I think seeding should be seeding, and that's how every other outside of the NFL, which is just silly, and winning a division at 7-9 can get you a home playoff game. Yeah. I think, we should go by the committee seeding for those. But, man, let's talk about this championship schedule, because tracking it out to January 20th was an absolute beating from a podcast perspective. Just lowering the curtain here for a second. It was a beating. Yeah. It was a labor of love, but it was an absolute beating. And we found out today that in a couple of years, it's going to be January 25th. What are we going to do? I might tender a resignation before that.
Well, I mean, hey, when the SEC takes their annual bye week, we might have to take a bye week as well.
We won't need a bye week. I think
get healed up.
Yeah.
We'll send the backups out, send the second stringers out to play North Alabama, and
we'll let our wives run a podcast for the quarterfinals or something. If it's still going to be blowouts in the first round, our wives will be covering the first round. We'll be.
Hey, the people are talking. I think, and if you haven't heard what Trey's alluding to, they announced the playoff announced 2027.
So the 2026 season, but in 2027.
So not this upcoming season, but the next season, the national championship game will be in Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas, and it will be on January the 25th. Now, Trey, did we not just set a new low for national championship viewers since COVID?
We did.
Did we not just have the longest college football season in human history that we survived through?
I believe we did.
Putting those two things together, it's, I think, worth saying, you know what, maybe the general population got a little exhausted from college football. Wouldn't that kind of be the first flag that might come up for you?
Exhausted is an interesting word. And again, we just got through saying that 1 year is a very small data size, and we need to figure that out. But I think it's less getting tired and more just getting lost in the shuffle of people moving on to other things. We're excited about college football. I just spent the first segment of this show talking about how great the bowl game ratings were. But I think when you're playing on the same weekend as what many consider the best weekend of the NFL playoffs, the divisional round, where there's 4 big NFL playoff games, 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday, and you're trying to sneak in on that Monday night. This year it was on a 3-day weekend. I haven't looked at the calendar to see if that's MLK Day, but you're at the end of a 3-day weekend when people are trying to prepare to go back to work. You're just up against so many things. People are ready. Some fan bases are ready, really into basketball at that point. Maybe they're going to a basketball game that night or thinking about basketball. There's just so many things that you could be competing with. And it seems like such a no-brainer. It seems like so many headaches would be solved if we just found a way to play the championship game on New Year's Day. That just seems like it would solve so many problems. It would help the transfer portal. It would help people not be as fatigued about what's going on in college football. It would help bowl season by condensing it a little bit, right? And getting people more fired up to travel. It just seems like that could solve so many problems. And you'd have a ratings bonanza. If it was a standalone game on New Year's Day, or maybe you have a couple of other, like a Citrus Bowl or something as an appetizer, and then to the national championship. A lot of people have said it needs to be at the Rose Bowl every year. I could be on board with that. But you're talking 30, 40 million viewers compared to the 20 million that we got this year on a Monday night. You're talking easily, I think, 30 or 40 million if it's on New Year's Day.
I think access is the greatest advantage that college football could be leaning into for all the reasons that you just said. I mean, look, if you go the other way, like we've advocated for, and a lot of people are advocating for, if you start college football earlier, right, in August, to preserve the fall semester sport that college football is supposed to be, you have every fan in the country locked in for a set window of time. They know from August through New Year's Day or the first week of January, it's college football season, right? And you can compete with the NFL on a couple of weekends, or you can try to avoid that. But for the most part, you're going to have college football fans locked in on those games. You can do all of that by just bumping the start of the season up, not going into January. I mean, goodness, in 2027, we're going to be on the doorstep of spring training when we play the national championship. Like, that's ridiculous, right? We will have teams that finish their bowl game a month and a half before the national championship is played.
We're 3 weeks from college baseball as we're recording this today, and the championship would be tomorrow as we're recording this today.
I mean, that's it. It seems like such an own goal from college football, where if you want to get away from the NFL, if you want to take away the NFL, what's the root of the problem? You're not the only show in town, right? You can't monopolize people's interest. But there's an easy solution to do that. And I say easy, like it's armchair quarterbacking for sure. But I don't understand why, to the corporate C-suites that run this game now, going later into January and being a sneeze away from the month of February is somehow better than just bumping the games up a little bit into August, right? Finding another way to incorporate all these games into the month of December instead of all throughout the month of January. I think college football executives had a chance to monopolize and boost awareness and enjoyment of their sport to a historic level, and they missed it. I think they blew that assignment by deciding to go further back. Furthermore, to your point, it's in Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas. And I know everything in sports is going to Vegas now. I know that's, big profits for corporate sports. But as far as like an enjoyment and an immersiveness that we crave with college sports, you and I were talking before we hit record. Traditionally, we have not been on the national championship always needs to be played at the Rose Bowl bandwagon. But as this game gets increasingly more corporate, and you have the Cotton Bowl, and you have the Sugar Bowl, and you have the Fiesta Bowl lose their fun sponsors and really just become, corporate C-suites that are at the games, and the true fans are in the second and third levels, there's just kind of a sterileness, I think, to an element of that game. And you can tell on the TV broadcast, right? It's not as loud. People don't look like they're whipped up into a frenzy until well after the game has started and something big has happened. It just feels like, and in the broadcast as well, it feels like that anticipation, that Keith Jackson element that we used to have, it's gone. it's gone. And I feel like that buzz is not easily reclaimed as long as we keep playing in NFL stadiums.
Right. And yeah, if you're going to call it the Cotton Bowl and play it at Jerry World, like the beacon, the bastion of corporate greed that is Jerry World, built Jerry Jones' vanity project, then don't cry to me about tradition when you're kicked out of the rotation of the college football playoff. To me, the Rose Bowl, and again, I think I've said on this podcast that the Rose Bowl needs to get over themselves in the past, and I still think that a little bit. I think they act like we've never seen a sunset before when they force the network to start the game while the Peach Bowl is still going on so we can see the sunset in the fourth quarter like we've never seen a sunset before. But to their credit, they are the only ones that are holding to tradition, staying in their traditional stadium, the pomp and circumstance of the Rose Parade, the San Gabriel Mountains and the sunset hitting it. Like, that is the one traditional bowl game that has held on to that. So if anyone should be rewarded for that, it should be the Rose Bowl. And I think they should get to keep their New Year's Day time slot. Now, here's the other thing I was going to say, and we can move on to other things, but you know what else is going to happen if they don't get a hold on the scheduling thing and they actually allow championship games to be played on January 25th? What is going to stop a team from just playing their players that enrolled in January? Because the NCAA has lost every single court case that has involved players. So the first time that a school says, hey, this 5-star freshman or this elite wide receiver that we got in the transfer portal that's already enrolled in classes and has been for 2 weeks, why can I not roll them out there in the national championship game if I want to? Why can they not be dressed and ready to play on the sidelines? NCAA is going to lose that. There's no logical reason. It actually happens in basketball quite often that a player is maybe academically ineligible, not a transfer from one school to the other, but all the time there's players that join and are eligible to play at the end of the fall semester for college basketball. So they're going to lose that logical battle if it goes to court. And why would you not try to get your new wide receiver out there after he's practiced with the team for a couple weeks?
It's a good point. I mean, you're already seeing those early enrollees. They are dressing out. They're not wearing pads, but they've got jerseys. They're practicing with the team during the weekly practices. I don't think you're that wrong. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah,
January 9th. Okay, maybe you haven't started classes yet. You probably haven't.
Yeah.
There's your line, but January 25th, they're sitting in History 101 on Monday, and they should be able to play in that game on Tuesday if it's on a Tuesday, right?
Good for them for going to class.
Allegedly, we know they're not. But.
It's an interesting point. We'll have to keep an eye on that. Yeah, I like that idea.
You heard it here first. When it happens, when Bama rolls out a transfer wide receiver in the semifinal next year, must
credit 3 Tech Pod. Couple other things that we had a note on the portal window moving to a very specific window of time. Actually, since I wrote that in the run sheet, the coaches unanimously approved a 10-day window in January going forward. So they recognize that the portal chaos is not good for the sport. It's not good for them. You have coaches who are actively still coaching and preparing for games, and they're somehow supposed to also be thinking about their next year's roster and actively recruiting, while a team that went 3-9 is at a huge advantage if they can schedule those interviews and schedule those visits. So 10-day window in January doesn't necessarily help those teams that are going to be playing on nearly February 1st, but at least it's somewhat improved.
January 1st championship would fix that too. Everybody's done. They can pack up all their stuff and get to their new school.
Fall sport should be a fall sport. That's a good idea. I know you have beat the drum for bringing divisions back, right? And I'm fully on board with you here. CFB Headgear on Twitter tweeted at us. He said, wins have to matter, right? That not all schedules are created equal. And clearly the only possible way that you create any sort of standard or uniformity is by bringing divisions back and having teams inside conferences play close to everybody, right? Have a chance at all the same teams that your opponents do in conference. And, hopefully that would get you towards an FPI, a strength of schedule rating that's somewhat similar to the other power conferences, quote unquote, right? Is there any sort of way that college football can put the chicken back in the egg here?
I think we got to be innovative. I think we've got to, like you heard Jim Phillips this week, the ACC commissioner, talking about potentially having their regular season champions sit out the ACC title game and have 2 versus 3 play and have that be a right for a play-in tournament if we're in a situation where there's dedicated bids. I think we got to be innovative. We got to think outside of the box like that, because if we're going to have Indiana's play one ranked team and lose decisively and still get into the college football playoff, this isn't an anti-Indiana take. They went 11-1 on a Big Ten schedule. You should be in 100 times out of 100 if you go 11-1 on a Big Ten schedule. But if we truly want the best teams, we need to make sure those teams are battle tested. And we need to have some sort of flex scheduling like the NFL does, where it's based on the previous year's finish and conference titles. We need to have mandated cross-conference games. I think Penn State, Ohio State, Ohio State plays Texas, but I looked at Penn State's schedule, and they don't play a Power 5 opponent outside of the conference. So don't crow about playing 9 conference games when the SEC only plays 8, when you're playing an FCS school and 2 G5 teams in your non-conference. So we got to find some way to standardize that. We got to find some way to maybe not even have set divisions. I'm of the opinion that you could change divisions every single year and have it be based on the previous year's conference finish, kind of snake draft it and work something out that way, where it is balancing it out and protecting rivalries when you can. But again, these conferences sold their souls for TV dollars. Don't cry to me about tradition when you killed the Pac-12 to invite half of it to your league. Don't cry to me about tradition when you robbed the Big 12 of 4 teams. You might not get to protect every single rivalry game you want, but we got to find a way to balance the scheduling. We got to find a way to computerize power rankings and have something similar to what the college basketball has with the net and what baseball has with RPI. Yeah,
I agree. There has to be, I mean, quite honestly, the next item on our run sheet is welcome to the National College Football League.
Let's just rip the Band-Aid off, man. Let's get first place schedules. Let's get second place schedules like the NFL does. Let's just rip the Band-Aid off and stop pretending at some point.
Well, and it stinks because it truly is the death of college football as we know it. But I mean, the game, the tradition, the way that we think of college football, it's been being eaten away for a long time, right? And I think the Xavier Lucas, I put this out on Twitter, the Xavier Lucas lawsuit, Washington cornerback that transferred to Wisconsin, and then basically after a couple of days wanted to go to Miami instead. He had signed an agreement with Wisconsin, a rev sharing as a part of the new rev sharing agreement. Wisconsin saying, nope, you can't go in the transfer portal. You've signed an agreement with us. You're under contract with us. He gets a lawyer involved that says, kick rocks. He can come to Miami. All of this, it's just too much, man. And at this point, it feels like we've got way more problems than solutions. And so if that means going to a national college football league where college football, at least a part of it, just breaks away from the NCAA, they become their own thing. Baseball, basketball, hockey, all of these other sports, lacrosse, all go back to regional conferences that make sense, right?
Jeez.
You get rid of UCLA having to see the Statue of Liberty twice in 2 weeks, right? I mean, at this point, it doesn't make sense to treat football and the rest of the sports as if they're a part of the same academic and athletic standard, because they're not. They're just not. So football needs their own rules. Football needs their own governorship. And I think if we can truly get to a system where we're focused on what's best for college football, the game of college football, instead of trying to pretend that it also exists in the same ecosystem as field hockey, it's probably a step in the right direction.
100% with you. I'm begging college football and conferences to give up on the minor sports and just let them go back to regionality, because it's more fun for the players, I think, to play guys that they grew up with and girls that they grew up with. And like you said, we don't need the Washington women's tennis team flying to Rutgers for a conference game. We just don't need that. And yeah, I'm strongly of the opinion that that's going to happen within the next 2 or 3 years. I think maybe even when this college football playoff TV contract is up after the 2026 season, that might be a next big breaking point. But the only thing I'll say is, for people that will wail about tradition, we did all kind of help create this, right? Like, if you're listening to this show, you're listening to officially an off-season college football podcast. You're one of the sickos like us that is driving this demand. And the only other thing I'll say is that all the other semi-pro, somewhat professional football leagues that aren't the NFL have gone under. So maybe if you really want tradition, you need this to come on, and maybe it'll crash and burn, and we'll just reset to some sort of sanity after that.
just wipe the slate clean. Just go back to the Big East and the WAC, and
we need to see late stage capitalism version of college football to be wiped out and go back to something more pure.
It's what's the Joker line? Some men just want to watch the world burn. That you may be there as a college football fan. You may need to burn down Gotham to get back to where you want. No, all of that joking aside, I mean, listen, we had a tremendous year watching the game that we love, talking about it, growing, and getting to have fun with you guys, the Jimmies and the Joes, right? So sure, at the end here, certainly some like real things that we'd like to see changed, and we can pontificate about solutions and ideal worlds. But at the end of the day, like the thing that I keep coming back to, and the thing that I keep writing on social media, is I'm just enjoying the game, right? We do this because we love the game. We're passionate about it. And no matter how many problems there are, like we don't want to be a podcast that just gets sucked into the weeds of like the labor market, right? Like I don't want to talk NIL bylaws if they actually existed on this podcast, right? Like
there's a reason that we've talked actual games on the field all through December, and we haven't really mentioned the transfer portal.
Yes. Yeah, I just, it's real, and there are plenty of other shows that get in the weeds of who's winning the transfer portal and, X, Y, and Z. It's just not us. That's just not us. We'll talk about it when it's all over, when it's all said and done. And I mean, if you've been a fan of this show for any part of the 3 years, you know that we go hard in the preseason. We do in-depth team previews for every team. So there's a time and a place to talk about all that and put together the two deeps. But man, I've just enjoyed getting to celebrate a ringing success that this year has been. And I know you have too.
Absolutely. It's all about the games that are played on the field, and we love that more than anything. We wouldn't be recording this show if we didn't love college football. And that's why we're here, but that's why we know you guys are here too. So whatever that leads, whatever weird form of the next big change in the sport takes, we'll still be here, and we'll still be really excited about the games when they're played on the field.
That's right. College baseball season up next, though.
3 weeks.
Very excited for that.
Basketball too. Basketball has been a lot of fun so far this year. If you're an SEC fan and you haven't tuned into SEC basketball yet, it is what you think SEC football was this year.
Yeah, there you go. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of The Three Technique. Again, appreciate you guys listening. Welcome to the off season. Officially, we decided this is put the bow on year 3. So the next time you hear from us, it's year 4 of the show. We're excited. We're looking forward to it. We hope you'll come along for the ride as well. For Trey Reeves, I'm Mitch Mason. Thanks for hanging out with us. Until next time, so long, everybody.
Gracious him. How about